del congreso que hemos estado desarrollando durante estos 2 días, en el que Jonathan Tummons va a hacer la sesión de cierre y nos va a hablar de las posibilidades de la etnografía en la investigación educativa. Jonathan Tummons es profesor de educación en la Universidad de Durham, en el norte de Inglaterra. Tiene una amplia trayectoria como investigador y académico en el campo de la etnografía educativa. Sus estudios iniciales fueron en historia medieval, y de ahí saltó a la formación de profesorado en educación secundaria y la formación postsecundaria, técnica y profesional en el Reino Unido, y de ahí a interesarse por la investigación educativa y completar un máster y un doctorado en educación en una diversidad de instituciones británicas y trabajos en el mundo académico que han derivado en el puesto actual que desempeña en la Universidad de Durham. No voy a hablar mucho sobre él porque vamos a escuchar, el objetivo es escuchar su ponencia, pero si queréis conocer su trabajo, os interesáis por su investigación, os recomiendo leer sus artículos y libros. Ha hecho trabajo de campo en una variedad de contextos etnográficos y se define así como un etnógrafo de una variedad de cosas que tengan que ver con la educación dentro y fuera de la escuela, en contextos formales e informales. Ha hecho trabajo de campo en educación superior, en formación de médicos, en formación profesional y técnica, y el último trabajo de campo, el que menciona en su bio y de que tiene publicaciones, es en un taller de reparación de bicicletas, solo para que pensemos un poco en la variedad de contextos que le interesan. Todos estos trabajos además están entrecruzados por una reflexión teórica y conceptual bastante profunda, y su trabajo se nutre la reflexión en torno a, por ejemplo, Latour y su obra, la teoría del actor red y sus derivaciones más contemporáneas, o la noción de comunidad de práctica derivada de la obra de Levi Wenger, ¿vale? Y finalmente, esto ya dije que lo iba a decir, es un melómano consumado y entonces si vais a seguirle en redes sociales, os recomiendo que le sigáis, no solo por las contribuciones académicas, sino por sus recomendaciones musicales que hace con mucha frecuencia, las cuales yo sigo y aprecio grandemente. Sí, esto ya se lo he dicho, Sin más preámbulo, de aquí a Jonathan Tummons.
Thank you very much. Thank you all very much. I'm guessing that I shall say thank you for that invitation, having not understood, let's be honest, any of it. Thank you very much for coming to this talk and for indulging me by listening to me speaking in English. Inspired by Professor Beach, I've put subtitles on through using DeepL, and then checked them back by them putting their translation into Google Translate. I was reading a book about artificial intelligence, and at the moment, after about 5 or 6 times moving from one translation AI to another, after about 5 or 6 movements between them, that's when the meaning really starts to degrade. So there's an interesting study somewhere for someone to look at the ways in which pockets of language can move from one online translation tool to another before the meaning starts to get lost completely. But that's a story for another time. I have a story I'm going to tell today, which is about being frustrated with research projects that I sometimes read, and what we should think about differently when thinking about what we do as educators and why. And my story starts as I walk from my hotel to the university every morning during my time here, and I go past an advertisement, a sign on the side of one of the tram stops for a recruitment for a university, not this university, a different university that I assume is not as good as this one. And you can see on the advert that they've put up some of their 5-star reviews that have come from the QS international rankings. And of course, as we know, working in education, perhaps not so much in Spain as in elsewhere, increasingly so in Sweden, as we've just heard, certainly in North America, certainly in the United Kingdom, everything we do needs to be able to be measured, to be evaluated, and put onto a league table or given a ranking of 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 stars. So we treat our universities and schools in the same way we leave a review on Google for a restaurant that we like to go to or a shop that we enjoy spending our money in. I loved this shop, 5 stars out of 5. I loved this university, 5 stars out of 5. It's kind of really what we're doing. And this is the soft end of something that has long been a focus for anthropological study, which is audit culture. The increasing importance in education, as in other aspects of public life, in the UK certainly in terms, for example, of healthcare provision, it is extremely common, or in social care provision, the idea that in order to extract maximum effort and best value for money for the taxpayer, we need to measure what is done. We need evidence for the choices that we make of what to do. We need to be able to measure how effective what we do is as teachers, as university lecturers, as writers of academic papers or books, in order to be accountable to anyone who wishes to pay attention to and make us accountable to their own agenda. This is the culture which has dominated neoliberal economic patterns of being and expression over the past few decades, certainly in North America and Western Europe, and increasingly more widely across the world as a whole. And within this culture, we've obviously seen changes made to the ways in which educational research gets done. So in the UK, we have something called the Education Endowment Foundation. They are a charity. They've been set up originally with a very large donation from a very wealthy individual. And they, how do they do it? They provide money for particular kinds of educational research in order to help schools, help colleges, that is for students aged 16 to 19 years old, and also early year settings, small children before primary school, do better. And they do this, as they say, through better use of evidence. It is evidence of effectiveness in education that they are interested in. Okay, fine. Well, let's look at some. So here is one report that they published recently. So this is from 4 years ago, 3.5 years ago. The impact of feedback on student attainment, a systematic review. So feedback, we all know what that is in an educational setting. This is aimed at school students, and the systematic review was done like this, starting out with a very large number of PDFs. Eventually, the authors of the report decided that just 51 of all those PDFs were based on the kind of research that they think is appropriate to generate evidence. And all the other PDFs are lost sight of. And there are many, many hundreds of them. But only these 51 will do. And this is because these 51 studies are based on, firstly, randomized control trials, and secondly, on quasi-experimental designs. In the UK, increasingly, it is the notion of the randomized control trial in education, borrowed, although not necessarily effectively, from medical research, from healthcare research, that is increasingly dominant in our educational discourses. If you want to get some money from a government agency to do some research, tell them that you're going to do a randomized control trial. If you don't want to get any money, tell them you're going to do some ethnography, which is, of course, what happens to me, and that's why I can't afford new clothes. So here is our study. We've got 51 studies. These 51 studies are then analysed once again as part of the systematic review. It's a large document. It's about 50 pages or so. It's full of tables such as this, which I genuinely do not understand. So I'm not even going to try and pretend to interpret it for you, because I honestly don't know how this kind of thing gets done. It's a magnificent collection of formulae and statistics and ways of working that are entirely alien to me. And likewise, much of the writing I found quite difficult to read, so I've not translated that one. But by the time you get to the end of the study, what we find is a very simple conclusion, which is this. Feedback, we see at the end, may have a role to play in raising attainment alongside other effective interventions. Feedback might work. Well, what a surprise that is to me. Who would have known that feedback to students is a good idea if we had not given someone some money to do this systematic review? This is entirely new knowledge to me. I'm so happy now. So now we have our academic document ready. We will translate these findings to our teachers. And the Education Endowment Foundation does the kinds of things you would expect. So one thing they do is they make posters, right? And these posters can be sent to schools, and the schools can put them on the wall and use them for training for their teachers and things like that. And here is the poster that came from the systematic review. Okay? And you can find all this on the internet easily enough. It's all open access. So let's just look at 2 of the recommendations that are on the poster for our teachers. Remember, these are teachers who have had their training. Okay? This is not their first day at work when they see this. They are already qualified teachers. Before providing feedback, teachers should provide high quality instruction, including the use of formative assessment strategies. Well, again, I'm so surprised. Who would have known that teachers should provide high quality instruction before doing any assessment and feedback? Brilliantly, they tell us that the instruction should be high quality and not low quality. Right? Very important. I'm sure there are many teachers who are thinking, I'm just going to do low quality instruction today. Oh no, now I have seen this poster, I will make things high quality instead. Right? This is definitely happening. Here's another one. Written methods of feedback, including written comments, marks and scores, grades, can improve pupil attainment. However, the effects of written feedback can vary. The effects of written feedback can vary. Who knew that for some students written feedback is a good idea, and for other students written feedback is not such a good idea? This is, again, amazing and breaking news for me. So with all this new knowledge, I think, well, how did I not know this already? But then, of course, I did know this already. Because I'm older than I look, thanks to my skincare regime, I did my teacher training about 27 years ago. I did my teacher training. Now, my background as a teacher was in adult education, so these are afternoon and evening courses for adult returners who have left school with no qualifications and come back to study later in life. And then later on I worked in what in the UK are called further education colleges, and these are colleges that deliver technical and vocational programs and also part-time programs for adult learners. And so these that you can see, these are the textbooks that were my reading list for when I did my teacher training course. And if you look at those textbooks, they all tell you that it's important to give feedback, and that feedback will work differently for different students, and that ideally our teaching should be of high quality before we start to evaluate and assess our students and give them their feedback. I am yet to be convinced that this systematic review has taught me anything I did not already know, or that as a professional community we did not already know through our experience, through our initial training, not only in the years since this report was written, but decades ago, 27 years ago in my case. How do we make sense of this peculiar situation? It's all about what we think is going on with this better use of evidence. And this drive that very much exists in the UK and increasingly elsewhere, that unless we can say we have evidence, we cannot make a statement such as feedback is a good idea, some feedback is not a good idea. What's your evidence for saying so? What is your proof for telling me that this will work with one student but not work with another? And the everyday experience and practical wisdom of our teaching profession is marginalized, is shut out in favor of something that has to be based on an evidence-led report, a systematic review full of randomized control trials. Now, this is a problem. I'll come back to this slide again later, but for now I just want to mention a part of it. In an article published in Ethnography and Education written by Karin Borgnacker, who some of us in this room will know well and have read before, she describes what the problem for all these kinds of systematic reviews in terms of it being a risk for regression to the common sense level of knowledge. The idea that students need feedback and different students need different feedback is a perfect example to me of a common sense level of knowledge that we did not need a systematic review to find out about. And this is a problem, and we need to therefore perhaps do something different in order to provide meaningful knowledge for our teachers, for our teacher educators, and for anyone else who is interested. And as we shall see, as this talk proceeds, one of the ways we're going to do this is through meta-ethnography, which I will come back to. So for now, let's just think about the kinds of research that are being used in these systematic reviews. In the UK, I am told that a randomized control trial is the gold standard of research. In the medical professions, the randomized control trial is the best, and therefore we should do the same in education as well. Now, even if we decide not to think about whether or not we can genuinely have a random sample in a school-based or university-based study, and that we can genuinely control for every variable that might make a difference to how a student works and learns and acts and behaves within a schoolroom or a college workshop or a university laboratory, even with all those things dealt with, we still have problems, and there is, happily, increasingly, a number of serious criticisms of the use of randomized control trials in education, 3 examples of which are on the screen now. The last one of which is a colleague of mine at Durham University, and it's all the stuff he's written about this is brilliant and strongly recommended. The paper listed at the top by Lorty Fogg and Inglis is one of the best things I've ever read and strongly recommended. It's brilliant. So we know, we have a serious critique of randomized control trials in education. Well, we're just told you're not doing them properly. Pay more attention to how they do randomized control trials in medicine, and then you will solve many of these problems. Okay, fine. So what do the medical people tell us? Well, in the healthcare sector, they are also questioning whether randomized control trials are quite as amazing as they think they are. So within not only education, but also in medical research, there are serious questions to ask about the design, the value, and the findings that come from randomized control trials. We need to do something else. What should we do now? Well, obviously, as we know, because this is why we're here, the answer is ethnography and meta-ethnography. But before I can give you that answer, we have to spend a little bit of time thinking about exactly why it is that ethnography and meta-ethnography can help us answer the kinds of questions that I think we need to answer. And I'm going to do this by drawing on a small number of ideas from Bruno Latour. Bruno Latour passed away about 2.5 years ago. Some of you will have come across his work, some of you will not, and that's okay. He was an anthropologist and sociologist and philosopher in the grand French tradition. He was a key figure in the early establishment of a field of study known as social studies of science, or also science and technology studies, that later led to actor network theory, for which he is best known. But then all of this work and all of these ideas were then brought together by him in a book that was published 12 years ago, which is called, in English, An Inquiry into Modes of Existence. And this is nothing more than an attempt. Sounds like it doesn't work. It's a successful attempt by Latour to bring together in one place all of the different aspects or elements of the work that he'd been doing during the previous 20 to 25 years in a single model of inquiry which seeks to address one of the overall questions that he answers throughout his intellectual work, which is the unraveling, the unpacking, the questioning of what we call modernity. This idea that we live in a society that is rational and technical, that the discourse of science is neutral and pure and objective, that these kinds of objective and neutral decisions should therefore drive the ways in which we make our decisions about the lives that we lead, the institutions that we build, the political relationships that we have, anything you can think of. And Latour's broad critique has always been, as he says in the title of one of his books, actually, we have never been modern. This whole idea of somehow changing as human beings as a consequence of scientific rationalism and technical modernity is a myth. And what we need to do is therefore think again about what is happening in the world around us now and find a new way, or new ways, in the plural, to describe it. From here, we can then see that the inquiry into modes of existence does what he's been doing all the time. Latour, as some of us will know, likes the metaphor of the black box. Things happen, and they happen so often, we just put them in a black box, and then we stop asking important questions about them. What we need to do is open those black boxes and look at what is inside them from a very fine, detailed perspective. No detail is too small for us to understand what goes on in a black box. When we make generalizations, when we make broad, overall, overarching comments about things, that is when we've put things inside a black box, and we need to stop doing that and go in the other direction. And there are several of these black boxes that Latour is interested in. He is interested in politics, as we know. He is interested in philosophical matters. He's interested in epistemology, if you like that kind of thing. Three of the best examples that are quite concrete and therefore easy for the new reader to think of are technology, science, and law, which we can see brought together inside the Modes of Existence book, but that we could also see represented in individual books that he published throughout his career. So throughout the Modes of Existence book, we can see the roots, the traces of this work in much of the other scholarship that he produced in his career. So for technology, a good place to look is his book Aramis, which is an ethnography of a failure to create a light transportation system in Paris. Okay, it's a story all about how a light railway system, kind of like a tram, not exactly, did not work, even though it looked like it should have done. It's one of my favorite things. Pandora's Hope, The Hope of Pandora, this is a collection of essays, some of which are based on his early articles, that look at the ways in which what we call scientific knowledge is established. Right? How do we get from the messy data of a laboratory to the clean, polished, finished report that we read on a PDF on our laptop screen? What is the journey that is taken by the knowledge or knowledgeability that we encounter when we're doing our work, and how does that get turned into a PDF or a report or a poster? And then the third example of law comes from his ethnography that was published in 2003 in French, then translated into English later, The Fabric of Law, when he spent some time at the Conseil d'État in France, following people and also lots of pieces of paper as new legislation was passed. And Latour's interest was in how does, for example, a petition from a member of the public become an aspect of a new law or a new statute. Throughout all this work, it is his attention to fine-grained detail, which we know of because we're ethnographers. This is how we do our work, that characterizes what he does across all of these areas of inquiry, which we now refer to as modes of existence. So there is a mode of existence for technology, there is a mode of existence for scientific knowledge, which he describes as reference, and there is a mode of existence for law as well. With these tools at our disposal, we can then look again at what is going on with our systematic reviews and our randomized control trials. And my argument is that what these kinds of reports do matches perfectly with one of Latour's own criticisms of the moderns, the state of modernity that we're told we live in, but that we don't really, which is that the moderns rely on what he describes as an imitation of the results of objective knowledge. This knowledge looks like it is objective and therefore scientific and therefore rational, and therefore we should use it to inform our policy, our practice, our pedagogy, our curriculum. But this knowledge is not really objective knowledge. It is an imitation of objective knowledge. It looks like it is, but it isn't. And we know this when we look inside it, when we take this knowledge out of its black box and explore what is really happening in front of us. At the same time, though, our critics of Latour and other social theorists will say, well, you don't believe in objective knowledge, right? Some of us may have heard this criticism. The problem with all this postmodernism is that you say there is no such thing as truth, that everything can be real, that we live in a multitude of realities, and therefore nothing is real. Okay, this is very much the critique, particularly of the, levelled against, sort of a number of sort of French and North American postmodernists that I've read. Well, nothing is true because everything is true. We all have our own truths that are subjective to us. But this is not what Latour is doing, and to argue that Latour is a postmodernist in this way is a mistake. As he says in the inquiry, we want to be able to say that one thing is rational and another irrational. This thing true and that other thing false. We are interested in making truth statements, what he describes as modes of veridiction, if you'd like some more academic jargon. But the trick is, the important thing to remember is that these bodies of knowledge, yes, we're going to say it's true, but we're also going to say it is true now. And in the future, it may not be true. And perhaps in the past, it was not true, but now it is true, and we can establish this body of knowledge as best as we can for now. There was a time, 500 years ago, not that long ago, if you're a historian, 500 years ago, when it was true that the Earth was at the centre of the solar system and the sun travelled round it. That was true. Now it is not true. And the reason why it is not true is because now, hundreds of years ago, now we have better tools for measurement, more accurate tools for measurement. And these better and accurate tools for measurement can be used for anything, not just for exploring the solar system. If our tools and processes for exploring education get better, then our objective truths about what happens in education will change. But if we stick to a single way of trying to establish what may be true and what may be false in educational research and practice, then we're going to have a problem, because then we will only ever have an imitation of objective knowledge rather than something more worthwhile or something more useful. So what do we do? Well, we're going to do what Latour describes as redescription. It's quite simple, really. It just takes time. All we are going to do is look at whatever it is we're interested in, but just look at it again. We don't just describe what we see, we redescribe what we see from the perspective of the inquiry framework that he sets before us in his book. Inside the inquiry, Latour provides us with a series of theoretical and intellectual tools to allow us to inform the work that we do. He is interested in when something is mistaken for something else, a category error for those of us who read philosophy. The idea comes from Gilbert Ryle, who was a 20th century British philosopher. For example, when we read a curriculum document, we might think, well, this curriculum document is clearly an educational document. But it's not, and it never was. It was also, at the very least, a political document as well. And if we forget, or if we choose to ignore that it is also a political document, then we are committing a mistake. And this is one example of the kinds of mistakes that Latour is interested in all the different areas of inquiry that he wishes to open. Yes, this is therefore a philosophical inquiry, but it is also an anthropological inquiry as well. And whilst many of Latour's writings are theoretical and philosophical, many more of his writings are soundly empirical in their foundations. Now, doing research using Latour, specifically actor network theory, which is now wrapped up inside the new inquiry, or more generally, there's no methods textbook. Right? You know how you read research methods textbooks when you're a student and you have to do your research methods course. It's the one that no one likes doing at my university. I never liked them, so I never actually I got away without ever doing one, in fact, which is probably why I don't understand statistics. But for Latour, doing research is an ethnographic process, and it's been entirely persuasively argued, not just by looking at his work, but by reading other people as well, that to do this kind of work requires an insistence on painstaking ethnographic research. The kinds of research that we do in this room is perfectly aligned to a project informed by Latour's inquiry. So we have our theoretical and conceptual ideas, and we have our empirical foundations. The trick is doing all the research that we need to do in order to say things about education might take some time. So we're going to have to think about how we do that. Happily for us, there's already lots of good research out there. Here are two journals that I've put up at random, one of which you will know about, one of which some of the people in this room may have written for. And I've put this up, to say that there is a lot of this research ready for us to read. And also just to say very quickly that depending on the audience, sometimes people get upset if you say that ethnography and anthropology are very similar or the same or very, very different. And this is quite a lively discussion. I tend to move between the two without really thinking about it very hard, for which I apologize if there are essentialists present. But they're broadly the same thing for our purposes, right? So this is the world that we live in terms of our own empirical inquiry. But our problem is that in the world around us that is dominated by systematic reviews, the kind of work we do does not get taken very seriously. We're near the bottom of the hierarchy of evidence, and we need to do something about this, because this is the world we're in at the moment, the world of systematic reviews and randomized control trials. But now that we know that randomized control trials are a problem, now that we know that quasi-experimental studies are a problem, insofar as, yes, they can answer some questions, but they cannot give us very many answers maybe, and not answer the questions we want to ask. We need to do more, and we need to do things differently as well. So we're back to meta-ethnography. What better way to very quickly have a look at large bodies of compelling, empirically as well as theoretically informed material? When Bruno Latour writes about the ways in which scientists establish their knowledge, he does so based on years and years of field work as well as of reading. Now, I don't have time to do that much field work about education, but lots of other people have done that field work. And if we agree that we can take those findings and look at them as a whole through meta-ethnography, which is well established as a methodological approach, we can effectively generate a shortcut that allows us to start asking and answering questions from a Latourian perspective without having to spend 25 years doing all the different kinds of projects and empirical projects that he did before writing the inquiry book. In this way, we can move beyond the kind of common sense knowledge that our report from the Education Endowment Fund gave us, and instead start to think about questions that will be, as Borgnacker says, of real use value to practice and practitioners. So we're going to take ethnographies of education such as these, which I've chosen at random, and we're going to read all of these. Some of you will have read one or two of these already. And then we're also going to take meta-ethnographies such as these, which will be familiar to one or two people in the room. and use these, and we're going to use these as the empirical basis for our ongoing philosophical as well as empirical inquiry. So much of the work has been done for us. It's fantastic. Because if for Latour what we want to have is an anthropology of the moderns to redescribe science, technology, law, politics, and other matters of concern. Matters of concern is a phrase that occurs a lot in Latour's work, in actor network theory more broadly. What we're going to therefore argue that we need is to expand on what Latour has been doing. So Latour is interested in law, he's interested in politics. He doesn't really have much to say about education, specifically. But that's okay, because when he put together the modes of existence inquiry, he left the door open. And there is a statement at the front of the book, part of which is here, in which again you see on the website that accompanied the book when it was first published, that welcomed collaborators to do things with the toolbox that Latour has provided for us. The laboratory, as he says, is now wide open for new discoveries. Now, our laboratories are very different from the laboratories of a friend of mine who works as a chemist at the same university as I do. You know, my laboratory is when I'm observing people on a work-based learning program, or writing a paper on my laptop. These are my laboratory spaces. But we can take our generous notion of a laboratory, and we can take Latour's ideas and extend them out into the kinds of things that we are interested in, which is education. So what I have argued, and will continue to do so, the 2025 references to a book chapter that's not published yet, is therefore what we need is an anthropology of the moderns to redescribe education. So when we are next faced by audit cultures, we can think, well, what are the questions that they want us to answer, these audit cultures? Well, they want to ask us things like this. What works in education? What can be measured and what can be evaluated? Now, it may be the case that these questions are useful, although I'm concerned that they are extremely difficult to answer. And of course, I'm also concerned that the answers that we are given are only a pretend form of objective knowledge and not a form that is genuinely useful to practitioners in the way that Bornacker argues in her paper. So maybe we need to move away from these questions and think about some different questions instead. Firstly, and this is very much a traditional question that ethnographers and anthropologists of education have been asking for some time. But why not? How and why do human beings educate the way they do? But also, we then need to expand it a bit from our Latour perspective, because education doesn't just involve human beings. One of the most, if not the most important theoretical aspect of science and technology studies, actor network theory, the inquiry into modes of existence, is our focus not only on human beings, but on everyone and everything else in the world around us too, all the non-human beings that surround us. The tools, the objects, the artifacts, the places, the spaces, anything you like, is of equal value to our empirical as well as philosophical inquiry. This in actor network theory is called the principle of symmetry, the idea that we should investigate the non-human with the same care and attention as we investigate the human. So to inform that question, we can then say this, using the kind of phraseology that would fit into the inquiry. What and or who are the beings of education we are likely to encounter if we ask ourselves the question of their existence? And in this way, we can start to think about how anything, we have all kinds of things in the world around us. We have all kinds of people in the world around us. And sometimes these things and these people will be enrolled to do educational stuff. They will be made into beings of education for a shorter or longer period of time. And I propose that it's questions such as these, rather than questions such as what works in education, that will allow us to re-describe education in a way that will allow us to take education out of the black box it is in and explore it again in terms of the technologies that shape it, the politics that shape it, the laws that shape it, as well as the people, the students and the teachers who are involved. If you wish to read more, drop me a line. I'll send you a PDF, or maybe several, if you're very lucky. And I think I know what I'm doing, although I'm always willing to take advice and questions and comments, but I think that should be okay for now. Thank you very much.
Pues, yo creo que tenemos un ratito para algunas preguntas o comentarios, si queréis. Podéis hablar en inglés, podéis hacerlas en castellano y yo las traduzco, pero Jonathan va a contestar en inglés, así que eso es unidireccional. ¿Vale?
Dennis, obviously.
Yes. Dennis.
Unusual, making sense of things that just don't seem to make sense. Government investment in the gold standard of research that is the gold standard anywhere, that doesn't produce any useful knowledge. Making sense of that investment is very difficult. It has no social use value to the professional field, either in medicine or definitely not in education. What are the grounds upon which governments make the decision to invest such an enormous amount of money in a gold standard that isn't a gold standard?
Well, that's the trick, you see, because so here it comes. We'll have a bit of theory now. Within the political mode of existence, the ways in which we establish what we think is true, what we think is false, are qualitatively different from the way in which we establish what is true or what is false within a different mode of existence, such as law or technology, for example. The ways in which constructions of truth and falsity work in their own pitch, in their own way. And within that place, that level of reality, randomized control trials work. And the questions that they are asking work. In their world, in their universe, if you like, it makes perfect sense. Our concern is that we need to establish, by unblackboxing things, a conversation that is sufficiently influential that it can mount a meaningful alternative to a different way of thinking about what works and what does not work, what is good or what is bad about that kind of research.
Oh. So, within the political sphere,
Yep.
the principles of veridiction, as you call them, have a different base,
Yeah, that's right.
different set of structural relations, different aims and intentions. The aims and intentions are not necessarily to produce best practice within, say, a professional field, but really to displace one set of guidelines regarding practice by another set of guidelines regarding practice. In this case, removing socio-culturally sensitive anthropological and ethnographic kinds of research from education that can both pose difficult and complex questions and produce politically challenging answers, has to be displaced. And a good way of displacing it is to create a false aura around a set of practices that are totally and absolutely incapable of doing those very things. Is that the answer you're giving me?
Yeah, but then you've
So
got
are
to
the
remember...
fucking other bastards corrupt or what?
No, because within the political sphere, within the political circle, what they think what they are doing is what they have agreed sufficiently is the correct, the right, the appropriate thing to do. For us outside looking in, we can say, well, what you're doing is, committing a series of fundamental mistakes in your understanding of this aspect of educational theory, that aspect of educational pedagogy, or that aspect of practice. But until we can find a way to exercise what Latour would have called, a sufficient level of diplomacy to persuade one group of people that they need to listen to the way we would establish a truth statement about something rather than the way that they have done so, we are where we are. That's it.
Was that a logically consistent response? If the political field is making its decisions on a separate basis to that of the interpretation of what's genuinely useful outside politics, rather than inside politics.
So that's,
surely the argument breaks down there.
Yeah, so the category mistake lies in those people who do not acknowledge the overlap of the educational and the political, or the extent to which the education is distorted or reshaped by the political, because it is the political rather than the educational that drives the establishment of truth statements about what education should be doing. So our job is to find ways to be more persuasive than we're managing to do. Certainly, I would argue in the UK, possibly elsewhere. That's it. This will become a two-way conversation.
No, I'm going to try to break it a bit. That to me is just completely unsatisfactory. To say that the responsibility lies upon us to try to encourage people who are executing deeply corrupt, power-related, economically invested decisions. It's our responsibility to convince them that they're wrong about that. Surely our job should be to convince everybody else that they're wrong, that they're corrupt, derelict practices are what are driving the planet to the edge of extinction, that are repressing subaltern consciousness, that are exploiting women and men in labour processes, that legitimated the slave trade. Surely it's not our job to convince the politicians that they're wrong, but to convince everyone else that the politicians in this case are wrong.
Possibly.
That's one type of argument.
Yeah.
In the end, that's one way of persuading. Because it does happen.
But what are our jobs, right? Our jobs as education researchers. What do we do with the stuff that we do? Where does it go to? Who do we send it to? Do we need? Don't give it to them. Do we need to be politicians and not just educationalists? Story for another time.
Thank you, Jonathan, for your conference. It has been a pleasure to hear you. And I was wondering that at the beginning you give us a clear idea about how the mother project is related with science, and most of the time we think science taking the hard science as the standard.
Yeah, yeah.
And we try to do something similar when we are in the field of the humanities, social science, or all this stuff. And I was wondering that when we are doing ethnography, there is a moment when we talk about the analytical categories, and we try to make something quite, I don't know, like complex, to try to say that, well, I didn't create it, it's something objective, it's grounded in theory, it's more or less objective in some way, but I don't know, but in my experience, at the end, these categories come up or emerge because you have been thinking there. So we pretend and we try to make a real effort to show how we create it.
That's right.
But finally, it's more or less our creation as ethnographers. So in this sense, how we can think about the objective of the ethnography when we are recognizing that we don't want to follow the hard science perspective.
No, that's excellent. So, yeah, we want to be able to say things that people will take away. Otherwise, our studies would get extremely anecdotal very quickly. You know, we want people to read our papers and our theses and say, "Oh, yeah, that makes sense. That explains something I saw over here, or something I saw in a different place," and that's important to us. So our concern, therefore, is to say that, you know, what we do not want to describe, or that we do, is establishing objective knowledge in a sort of positivist sense, right? This is the truth. It will never be anything other than the truth. What we can say is that at the moment, this is what we know. This is what we think is going on. This is our good answer. It's not a subjective answer, although I am a subjective researcher. You know, I am, as an ethnographer, you know, I'm the research instrument, right? And my biases shape everything I see, my interests shape everything I look at. During the period of my last fieldwork, I chose to photograph some things and not photograph others, and that makes a difference to the papers I write and the theories I use. And that's all excellent, and that's okay, right? Because if I add what I have found to just one other study and one other study, we can build stronger chains of understanding that link the things that we're interested in with what we write about the things that we're interested in. So the example that Latour gives in the book is of a mountain in France, and the first time someone went there, maybe they drew a sketch of the mountain. So now I can know a bit about that mountain, but not very much, because I only have one sketch and it's not very good. But then as more and more walkers and mountaineers go to the mountain, they provide better sketches, and maybe one of them draws a map. And now I know a little bit more about that mountain. I've still never been there, but I know things about that mountain now. And then, when photography is invented, I can get photographs of that mountain, and now I can see very clearly what that mountain looks like, although only from a certain angle. And then as we have more photographs, and then video, and then Google Maps, and Wikipedia, I can know many, many, many things about that mountain, even though I have not been there. Because over time, the gap, if you like, between the mountain and what I can say and know about the mountain, the links between those two have been made stronger with each string of information, making a thicker and thicker chain between the two. And that is what we talk about from a science and technology's perspective, STS perspective more broadly, as well as specifically within the inquiry, when we talk about objectivized knowledge. It will change, but right now, with the instruments that we have, we've got it as good as we can get it. We balance objectivity and subjectivity, if you like, in a sort of union, whilst also remembering that to get to that knowledge, we've had to do lots and lots of work in the past, and we must not put all that other work into a black box and forget about it. We know things about that mountain because of all the people who walked there, and all the people who photographed it, and all the people who helped design the drone that could take an aerial photograph, and all the people who developed skills and practices of cartography and the measuring tools that cartographers use so that their mapping of the mountain can become more thorough, more detailed, and more helpful to us.
All right. I know you like your technology, so I'll let you get away with that. But at the end of the day, given one of your earlier slides, coming from the bottom of the league table of evidence, you're probably at the top of the league table of anecdotal production. What about the power structures that are keeping you in that position, despite your access to technology that allows you to, and your access to multiple anecdotal accounts? You're still at the bottom of you're still at the bottom of the league table, pushed to the bottom of the league table by other scientists whose contribution to collective knowledge, democracy practice, the valorisation of subaltern conscience and so forth. You're still at the bottom of the league table, brother. How are you going to get away from there?
I don't know, and this is part of the problem, isn't it? You know, you've got some things that you can do, but, you know, if there's lots of us doing it, it might be easier. If we realise that it might take time, that probably makes it more straightforward as well, even if it's not palatable to us. You know, it took quite a long time for everyone to agree that the Earth travels around the Sun and that the Sun doesn't travel around the Earth. So the fact that we've gone, you know, we've sort of embraced the evidence-based call for education, and now we've moved to a serious critique of that. You know, this has only happened in, you know, what, a decade, 15 years? That's not that long. I know it feels long because we're in it, but at the same time, it's not that long a period of time at all.
So you're just telling me to be patient then?
Well, maybe we do have to be. I mean, I know you're a very impatient chap, but, you know, yeah, maybe we just do have to be impatient. We have to keep doing the work. We do the work as best we can. We try and find ways to talk to people about that work and hopefully provide meaningful answers to different questions.
So engagement then?
Yeah.
Right, broad engagement
yeah.
then? Subaltern engagement then?
With whoever...
Generating revolutionary consciousness then?
Well...
The work of the vanguard then?
Well,
something along those lines?
Well, you do that and then let me know how that goes.
It goes very badly, I think. If it goes very badly, they might steal my pension, you know. Very badly. We're working against repressive structures of power, man. You know.
Well,
but I like literature, but where's the engagement with the power structures, man? You've got to engage with them. Sorry, I'm done now. I'm done.
Ahora sí que tenemos que cerrar el Congreso, pero no es mal momento para hacer el Congreso, porque simplemente va a subir a la Begoña a agradecer el trabajo y cerrar las sesiones formalmente. Vamos a poner... ¿Está encendido, no? No está encendido, perdona. Pues nada, estaba diciendo que es un buen momento para cerrar el Congreso porque el diálogo precisamente estaba, el diálogo encendido, estaba girando en torno a quiénes son nuestros interlocutores y para qué investigamos, ¿no? Y esto era un poco el eje de estas jornadas y de intentar establecer diálogos y puentes y escenarios de reflexión conjunta entre la investigación y el sistema educativo y los docentes y también navegar las frustraciones y los problemas y los desafíos que estos intentos de crear diálogo contienen. Vale. Y esta conferencia, esta charla final, pues ha puesto sobre la mesa desde otro ángulo este mismo tipo de tensiones. Entonces, dicho esto, vamos a cerrar el congreso con unas palabras de Begoña, pero antes de hacer esto vamos a poner el segundo vídeo que forma parte de los dos vídeos que hemos creado para estos interlocutores. El primer vídeo con el que abrimos el congreso estaba destinado a familias y niños. No sé si esto quedó claro. Bueno, quedó claro por el tono, pero creo que no se dijo explícitamente. Este es el vídeo que queremos que vean una de las familias y alumnos y alumnas que han participado en el proyecto, y haremos que lleguen a ellos. Este segundo vídeo tiene como destinatarios y destinatarias al profesorado, el profesorado que ha participado en los distintos proyectos y en las distintas etnografías que han sido parte del proyecto. Creo que está en este ordenador y lo voy a poner.
I don't think I do. No, I don't think I do.
Este, ¿no?
Sí que vemos cómo existe una relación entre lo que viven los alumnos y alumnas y entre qué y cómo decirlo. Por ejemplo, trabajando con el alumnado, la elaboración de historias, una alumna un día estaba muy preocupada con el tema de la COVID y su historia iba relacionado con eso. A otro alumno le preocupaba el bullying y bueno, pasó lo mismo. Todo esto de la participación pues lleva también a desarrollar el pensamiento crítico.
Los problemas matemáticos los resuelven juntos y juntas, y en la pizarra digital se van realizando los diferentes pasos necesarios para resolverlo. Los niños y las niñas tienen que encontrar juntos la solución al problema, con lo que así se les obliga a escucharse entre ellos y buscar la solución correcta. El control queda así de manifiesto y se utilizan los dispositivos digitales como soporte.
En lenguaje tenemos sesiones de lectura compartida, sector de lectura intergeneracional en la que vienen abuelos o gente de la comunidad a leer cuentos, que tienen que ver con la cultura del pueblo. También se hace lectura en parejas, eso es muy enriquecedor para un aprendizaje que sea a través del andamiaje.
Yo creo que ya agradecemos a todas, a todos los ponentes, a las participantes, a todas las que habéis tenido la paciencia de estar aquí en todas estas horas seguidas, en algún momento dado pasando frío. Y desde luego yo creo que sí que queda abierta esa responsabilidad de todas y todos ante muchísimos retos que están abiertos, por supuesto, aprovechando las potencialidades que hay desde el punto de vista tanto de las prácticas como desde el punto de vista de la reflexión que hay detrás y de la capacidad también de reconstrucción. Por eso, gracias a todas y yo creo que y a todos, y podemos seguir, yo creo, juntos. Más allá, desde luego, de los proyectos que hay, en alguna mesa esta mañana se decía, sino más allá de las publicaciones, por la responsabilidad, yo creo, social y educativa en la que estamos implicados e implicadas. Muchísimas gracias y ha sido un placer estar estos 2 días. Con todas vosotras y vosotros. Vamos a ir a comer a algún sitio, no lo sé qué planes tenéis o cómo estáis.